Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show from Scotland, where we return to the subject of American politics and the future of the Republican Party. Now, far from licking his wounds, Donald J. Trump looks set to strengthen his political hold on a party he once led from resounding success to comprehensive defeat. Today, we interview two top guests with vastly different views on the road ahead for the grand old party. Ed Martin, president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, and Rina Shah, who is founder of Republican Women for Biden. All of that and much more to come up in the show. But first, to your tweets, emails and messages in response to our show last week, featuring Professor Richard Murphy in our discussion on economics and political economy. Terry says, Professor Murphy is extremely eloquent. He makes complex issues accessible. Views such as his and those of Commonweal are what we need coming out of the pandemic. Taras Gal says, it was an excellent show as always, but particularly good this week as Richard Murphy explains what a newly independent Scotland can be and how energy wealthy we are. Habib says, exciting stuff from Professor Murphy, encouraging for Scotland. Norman says, we need to get that information that the Professor was discussing out there so that more can hear and realise that Scotland has an incredible opportunity to decide its own destiny and place in the world. Ira says, the EU will want Scotland definitely as a full pro-European EU contributor, and we should be part of that European Union as a full and equal partner. Sandra, however, says, and pay a lot for it too. And finally, Alan McCarg, who says, excellent show. Richard Murphy is an asset that Scotland should be using, with his agreement, of course, to win the economic argument. Thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed, Alan, for your comment. And now over to Alex, who's interviewing Rina Shah, founder of Republican Women for Biden.
Rina Shah, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thanks for having me.
Rina, you're successful in the election. You got President Biden elected, or at least helped get him elected. How's it working out so far?
Well, right now we're seeing exactly what most Americans expect to see in the first 100 days of any presidency, which is the settling in of a new administration, one that feels sometimes familiar yet uncertain. We're seeing a candidate make good on the promises of his campaign trail. And I think that's why I was confident mostly in my vote for Joe Biden, is because I felt that here's somebody, when they get into the Oval Office, they're not measuring the drapes. They're not sort of taking in the greatness of being in that position, because he's familiar with it. He had a very robust role, in my opinion, as a vice president, and he believes in one for his vice president as well. And so the confidence that I had in this president is that he will get in day one, that he will hit the ground running. So we're seeing a mixture of that right now. Has it been perfect? Absolutely not. He's a flawed human just like anybody else. But I'm most excited about really the progress he's made with the COVID-19 pandemic, which was what many of us really wanted to see from whoever was going to take the Oval Office next.
But from the downside, from your point of view, it looks like the Donald is back, and his speech to the CPAC conference this week indicates it looks like he intends to retain control of the Republican Party. How do you feel about that?
Well, Donald Trump is back as a private citizen. And like I just said, with American politics, it takes time to see real change. Clearly, the existential threat has been neutralized for the moment, I say, and that was Donald Trump. He was very divisive in so many ways, and I think the nation really needed a healing from that divisive rhetoric, the dangerous rhetoric he employed, and which we saw go into action on January 6th. So Joe Biden, he signed up for a very difficult task, but his life story prepared him for the moment. That's far different than Donald Trump. Donald Trump came from a world that many Americans could only imagine and dream of. And so what he's really doing now in his life as a private citizen is going right back to that world of country clubs and comfort, while Americans across the country are suffering. Mothers like myself of very young children have not had their children in school for a year now. It has been 1 year my children have been out of school. And I really blame the poor handling of the pandemic entirely on the Trump administration.
Now, the advocates of Donald Trump say that yourself and people like you who campaign for the Democrats are not real Republicans. How would you answer that charge?
And I would say that Donald Trump was not a real Republican. I opposed him from the minute he declared his candidacy because I did not find him to be a Republican in any way. His record would speak to that entirely. His opponents in the Republican primary gave great statements and would look at history, his donations to liberal candidates, his own lifestyle. It was a real moment in which the Republican Party showed its true colors when they allowed Donald Trump to hijack the party and to come in and really, without any empirical evidence, say that I'm one of you. So the reality is this, is that Donald Trump goes out into history and into the annals of history more than anything else as a disgraced president. If Republicans want to say that this was their standard bearer, they can do that. But there should be room for divergent viewpoints like mine in the party. One that means that we can reject what we don't believe is right for the country. Donald Trump rejected science, and that is why we continue to have the COVID-19's impact. Over 500,000 Americans dead on our shores because of what happened under his watch.
Now, Donald Trump was beaten, disgraced, as you put it, but nonetheless, in terms of the popular vote, he got the highest vote of any Republican candidate in a presidential election in history. So he must appeal to many, many sections of American society.
Well, certainly, that's a good point. And I think it was because, frankly, Republicans did not want to vote for the Democrat. So many people, in what I found over the course of the past year, were not willing to still take a chance on a Democrat. And it's because of the extreme polarization in the country. People on the right have demonized the left and have said that Democrats want to take us closer to a country like Venezuela. They've employed boogeyman tactics to get Republicans to say, you're better off voting for the one that's currently here than what you don't know. And that really speaks to the problem here. We've had, for a long time now, we've had so many average Americans feel like they're not represented, whether it's federally or even in state houses across the country. They feel that politicians are beyond their reach, that they're not average people, and that they go to public service to enrich themselves. I think that what we really saw here happen in election 2020 was people say, what's another 4 years? That's what Republicans took into account. They didn't make the calculation that I made, is that another 4 years could be dangerous for the country. And I think that's why so many more Republicans than expected clicked for Donald Trump again.
But just when people like yourself thought it was safe to get back in the water, it turns out that he's not going away to play golf. He's back again. So what happens to the Republican Party with this overweening presence of the Donald towering over it?
Well, like I've said, the adults are in the room again, I feel. There's certainly been a wave of calm now that the tweeter-in-chief doesn't have everyone on pins and needles anymore, awaiting the next bull in the china shop moment. The news cycle has slowed here in the United States, which is good for the American psyche, I believe. But what you just touched on was the Trump movement not going anywhere. And that is true. The Trump movement isn't going anywhere. And it'll be interesting to watch how that plays out in the years of Biden, because Trump and his surrogates seem to be hinting at a shadow presidency as well. And that's what Kimberly Guilfoyle said at CPAC this weekend. She was a former big news personality here in the United States and is now the girlfriend of Donald Trump Jr. She spoke at CPAC and she said Trump will achieve more from his desk in Mar-a-Lago than Biden and Kamala Harris will in the next 4 years. That's really wild to me. That's not democratic. That's not respecting our American norms and traditions. And I think even though there's not reliable polling to tell us so, the vast majority of Americans do want our norms and institutions respected. They want a healthy skepticism to be alive.
But when we look at the nature of Donald Trump's politics, can you put your finger on what is it that you're so hostile to? Is it his policies on the economy, his international policies, or is it the lack of respect that Donald Trump shows for a variety of sections of American society?
I find Donald Trump to be a wannabe dictator. That's really ultimately what it is for me. On my father's side, we escaped Uganda. We know what dictators do. We know when government gets too big and too oppressive. And Donald Trump is a big government guy. While from the other side of his mouth, he tells conservatives that he's a small government guy. He's a guy who doesn't have any kind of doctrine. He hates certain groups of people simply for existing. To me, he showed the country what he really believed the country should be. And it should be a country, in his opinion, that is predominantly comprised of white folks who practice a certain type of Christianity. That's all it is. And that's not what America wants. America genuinely wants to be the melting pot that people like myself were raised in the 80s and 90s and told it could be. This beautiful experiment where people come together from different walks of life and really subscribe to certain things. This pursuit of freedom and liberty and equality for all.
Now, Rina Shah, there's plenty of mini-me Trumps and wannabe Trumps who are lining up to seize the torch at some point from the Donald if he decides to pass it on. Can you point to a standard bearer from your wing of the Republican Party who might be a serious challenger to take it in a different direction?
Well, one common theme we saw this past weekend at the Conservative Political Action Conference was gaslighting and denialism. Folks were saying, they're wrong. The GOP is not divided. We are a united party. And there have been Trump surrogates saying that, we might have some differences within the Republican Party, but Trump has energized a part of the electorate that's necessary to keep engaged for the future, for the GOP to win, and that the GOP will continue to build off of what Trump began, and that he's still very much the figurehead. I reject that. I do think the Republican Party is quite fractured, more so than what mainstream media in the United States, at least, is willing to admit as well. So it's going to take a good bit of time to recenter our conversation again. And speaking of recentering, I think there are some good center-right voices that really will be elevated in some time, particularly in the lead up to our 2022 midterm elections. I'm looking at people like Congressman Adam Kinzinger from Illinois, a good young voice only in his early 40s. Congresswoman Liz Cheney, of course, the daughter and congresswoman from Vice President Dick Cheney, and she's the number 3 Republican in the House. She has shown that you can stand up on principle and speak your mind. It doesn't have to be in unity with everybody else in your caucus. Also, Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, a young mother in her early 40s as well, from Washington State. She's a congresswoman who also voted with Congresswoman Liz Cheney. They were the only 2 female Republicans in the House of Representatives who voted to impeach Donald Trump a second time. So I think these are the voices of the future. Look, studies have shown that the majority of Americans make up the reasonable center, and yet 30% of the extreme wings are in control of all of our national conversation. So that leads to a misunderstanding of reality. This market of centrists has to be tapped in order for us to really build a stronger and more united future. And so that's what I'm looking at those voices to do.
Rina Shah, founder of GOP Women for President Biden, thank you so much for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you for having me.
Now stay with us for a totally different perspective on the future of the Republican Party from Ed Martin, president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles Society. Join us then.
Welcome back to the show. We now turn from Republicans for Biden to Republicans for Trump. And Alex interviews Ed Martin, president of Phyllis Schlafly Eagles.
Ed Martin, welcome back to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you, Alex. Always good to talk to you.
Now, Ed, you're not the only one that's back. Donald Trump is back, like the Terminator. But the question that I'm going to ask you, looking at the comeback this week, is there not a danger that instead of CPAC, you've got what Donald Trump Jr. called TPAC? And now it's the Trump Conservative Coalition as opposed to the Conservative Coalition. Is that not a danger?
Well, it's an astute observation, Alec, and let me explain what I saw. In the last 4 years with Donald Trump as president, he really became the dominant Republican political figure. Now, that's no surprise in a certain way, but because he is not sort of fading off the scene like Reagan did, for example. Reagan was the last dominant American Republican political player like Trump. But Trump's not leaving, right? He's staying in the fray. And you're exactly right. When Donald Trump is at the party, he takes all the oxygen out of the room. He's one of the greatest showmen we've ever had. He's one of the great leaders we've had. And so I think it is Donald Trump's party. But that doesn't matter. What matters is the next election is almost 18 months away, and then after that, the presidential. And between now and then, Trump is going to coalesce the 74 million plus supporters who voted for him, and then we're going to see where it goes. And I think there'll still be some twists and turns, but I think that's what he was doing at CPAC. But the people that say the Republican Party is up for grabs, they're not understanding American politics. It's Trump's party, America first, less foreign wars, smaller government, drain the swamp. But it's all Trump right now, and I think that's going to be that way for as long as he wants it, in a certain sense.
But every leader has to have succession planning. And it's not easy to see there is within the ranks of the Republican frontrunners anybody who could realistically don the same mantle as the Donald.
You're right. Donald Trump is going to eclipse anyone sort of coming in behind him. But I think, American politics, again, it moves on those structures. In 2022, there'll be another one, in 2024. And I think we'll see some things emerge. I believe Donald Trump needed to do what he did for him. And he needed to do it because he needed to solidify the option. I don't know that he has a plan yet on where to go. I kind of think in American politics, we often say it's a mistake to run the last election. They change so much, and there's going to still be some more changing. But again, it's Trump's party, and he's the dominant figure in America on the center right now.
But how does the Trump comeback make people like Mitch McConnell feel in Capitol Hill? Isn't he the sort of figure that Donald Trump would still need? And he seems to now be thoroughly alienated.
When Donald Trump was president, Mitch McConnell passed into office by the Senate about 250 judges, transforming our judiciary. Mitch McConnell knows the game. And if he gets a president who's on his side, he'll play the game. If he gets a president opposed to him like Biden, he'll play the game. So I don't think that's the question. The bigger question, Alec, is I think we've seen now a transformation in America. The parties are separating, and the Republican Party has a claim, still has to be sort of worked on, but a claim for working Americans, a claim for the non-interventionist wing of the Republican Party. That's new for us, right? That in the last 25 years, the Republican Party has been the party that fought to fight the wars and change the world. So Donald Trump's shifted on immigration, on China. The Republican Party has a stark set of positions that are different than they were, or maybe more solid in a certain sense than they were 4 years ago. That's a big change. So going forward, Mitch McConnell will come in behind whatever the success is because he's got to win races. And in 2022, Mitch McConnell's got to win races in Senate races to get back the Senate. And he's going to care where the base is. And Donald Trump is talking to the base.
I want to ask you a question about the difference between centre-right and right-wing ideas on the economy and philosophy and the force of personality. Is there not a danger that some of the right's ideas on how you should run an economy and a society are rather eclipsed by Donald Trump's personality, where he seems to react to a variety of situations on impulse as opposed to having a body of thought behind it? Or do you think that's being unfair on your standard bearer?
No, I think it's fair, actually, Alec. I might say it's less on impulse than on his instinct about how to operate a business and his success in life. But I would say the Republican Party, the conservative party, has changed. Look, I've found myself, and I'm a pretty conservative guy on a lot of social issues and other things, on the economy, I'm less convinced that the free market with the government we have right now can operate the way it's supposed to. In other words, the free market is constricted by government. Therefore, we have to change what we're doing. Here's an example. I said this on an RT program last week. I was adamant. The Republican Party has to embrace helping working people. This may mean that we have to give direct payments to working people as they transition. That doesn't sound like a conservative on the economy. And I think Trump moved that party to being open to that in a way they weren't before. Look, the Republican Party used to arrive at Wall Street to pay homage to these great titans of industry. Now we say the system is rigged. right, and we have to change the system. That sounds a little bit like left-wingers on some of these issues. So Trump's instincts towards populism has transformed the conservatives. Now, to your point, Alec, you got to keep developing ideas in behind it to make it clear to people what's happening. But in this transformation, the information age and all that's happening so fast, we've got to be different than the old free market that says it'll just work out for you if you just play by the system. The system is stomping a lot of Americans. It's happening in the world, too. So I think Trump has led us in that direction.
I'm rather interested in the idea of Ed Martin being dragged to the left on the economy by Donald Trump, but I'll let that pass and ask you instead, if, let's say, I was a right-of-centre American on the economy, and perhaps I didn't much like foreign adventurism and interventionism in terms of military policy, but on the other hand, I didn't like the president's rhetoric on society and thought it was a bit old-fashioned, then would the Republican Party still be a comfortable home for me?
Well, I think, Alec, I hope so. I mean, I think we have to adjust our rhetoric, as you say. Every leader is going to be different, and I think after the Trump period, there'll be some other people that'll be different in terms of tone and all. The problem we have right now, Alec, is big tech and our old media are really dominating what we see and hear and know. So a lot of people were afraid of Donald Trump and COVID. When you look inside the numbers, a lot of other people, working class African Americans, working class Hispanics, we're saying that's a guy that's on my side. And I think, again, we've got to pull all that together. He's a transformational, transition character. But those pieces, I think, are real. And I think they'll make room for different kinds of supporters, like the positions you have. Over time, I think that will solidify. But it is a big challenge.
Now, Donald Trump has galvanized support, new support for the Republican Party. Of that, there's no doubt. He has achieved the second largest American presidential vote in history, and that was motivated by him and his personality. But on the other hand, he's also galvanized the largest American presidential popular vote in history, and that was the vote for President Biden. So is there not a difficulty that while you're motivating all these new Republicans, you're also motivating lots of new Democrats?
Yes, of course. I mean, in terms of the election results, as you saw them. But a couple things I would say. I think the COVID situation is one that presented headwinds unlike anything anyone could have anticipated. And I think in America, Alec, in terms of our voting blocks, our seniors were really scared by the COVID, and I think didn't think the president could handle it. I don't think any president could handle it. We're seeing the lionized Democrat in New York, Governor Cuomo, is being taken apart because what looked like great work wasn't so good. But no, look, President Trump has been able to galvanize supporters on his vision. I would say the opposition to him, Alex, has been galvanized by the fake news media spending a lot. The Russia hoax was a hoax, but it was a couple of years of propaganda to the American people. And lots of people that watch CNN, they believe that Donald Trump was working with the Russians, that the Russians stole the election, all that. Then the Fine People hoax in Charlottesville, where the president directly said, I condemn neo-Nazis and white supremacists. He was talking about fine people who care about statues and debate history. And that was pounded into the American people by the fake news media. And there are lots of people in America that think Donald Trump was Hitler. When you look at the actual facts and you say the Supreme Court hemmed him in all the time, the Congress hemmed him in all the time, the American people hemmed him in all the time. He wasn't even conservative on some things that I thought he should have been conservative on. So he was hardly Hitler.
I've just got two more questions on this aspect, Ed Martin. Is what we're seeing here in America something of a throwback to a century when, of course, successive presidents had to rail against the combines in iron and steel and heavy industry, which were had a stranglehold in the American economy at that time? Do you see some parallels in terms of Trump regaling against big tech as some people used to a century ago regale against big steel?
I do think that's true, but here's one more thing, Alex, to think about. I'm not sure with the intensity of media and social media that we may have in America ever a two-term president. Because by now, 6 or 8 weeks or however many days into Biden's administration, even the left is picking him apart, right? It's almost impossible to operate this massive government and not have major mess ups. And so suddenly it's the guy in office, and someday a gal in office, that takes on the weight, that takes on the water and is flailing. And you've got a challenger who says, I'll be better, and then get in and they have the same problem. So I think it's easier now for Trump to say, look, I did some things right. Biden is stumbling, and that's partly what you're seeing.
And finally, Eagle Ed, one quick tip for us. When this torch is finally passed on by Donald Trump, who's he going to pass it on to?
Well, I think that the guy that's really right now strong is Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. He was a congressman. He was in the military. Remember, people, especially American, our sensibility of our candidates, they get shaped by these kinds of things. And so Ron DeSantis is one guy that's a big name. Josh Hawley from Missouri, who's my home state, is a very impressive young guy. Remember, America tends to nominate candidates, at least, from our Senate or from our governors. So when you think of the bench, it's very uncommon for a guy like Donald Trump to come in. You know, in America, Mark Cuban talks about running, the billionaire investor who's got fame and all. But I think you're going to look at senators like Hawley, senators like Ron DeSantis. But I think it's far off, Alex, before we see who comes after Trump. He's going to be around. As I tell people, for 50 years, he's been a player in national and international media. When he was a younger man in New York, The Apprentice, now president. I don't think he's going to quite stop. He's not going to retire and play golf. He's going to keep playing the game. Whether he's the candidate or not will be a different question, but we won't know for a while.
Ed Martin, president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles Society, thank you once again for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
Always a pleasure, Alex. Thank you.
Not so long ago, lots and lots of journalists and even a few voters used to moan about the lack of real choice in American politics. Donald J. Trump changed all of that. And now he's back, like the Terminator. Now the party is being reborn in his image, and the creaking Republican establishment is once again playing for time, pretending to clap, while in reality wringing their hands. Others are already climbing aboard the next Donald bandwagon. Trump now carries the support of a large and vocal minority right across the United States. He has reached into sections of society that other Republicans can't reach. His appeal is to Main Street, perhaps to the back street, certainly not to Wall Street. However, in politics, every action has a reaction, and in turn the Democrats have assembled a large and mighty and winning coalition against him. There is no doubt that Trumpism has mobilised the second largest vote in American presidential history. The problem for the Republicans, it has also mobilised the largest vote in American presidential history, and that was the mandate that elected President Biden. And so from Tasmina, myself, and all at the show, it's goodbye for now, stay safe, and we'll see you again next week.